one of the lessons of Iraq, I think. I mean, so if you look like a loser, nobody's going to join your bandwagon. Nobody's going to get on your bandwagon. No, and look, when the war dragged on and the so-called Arab Street started to make noise about Israeli behavior, Arab dictators had no choice but to go and condemn Israel and support Hezbollah in that case, or rhetorically support Hezbollah. That's just one in a long catalog of possible missed opportunities in the last 4 or 5 years to actually break some sort of deadlock.
But I think you're quite right. There was a clear lesson to be learned by the reaction of the Arab world. As long as Israel hits the enemies of the Sunni states, they will stand on the sidelines and quietly encourage Israel. The moment Israel stopped bombing Hezbollah targets and moved onto Lebanese infrastructure,
right,
then the Arab world turned against
right,
Israel.
Not the most sophisticated strategy on the part of the Israelis.
Neither of you sound very encouraged, calmed, relieved that this week came the announcement that Iran wasn't working on a bomb after all since 2000.
The announcement or the guess? I mean, I try to make it now my policy not to believe NIEs. This way, that way. I mean, they're guesses, and every time we attach ourselves too fervently to an NIE, we wind up with egg on our faces. Look, I hope it's true. It'd be a wonderful thing if it were true that the Iranians have stopped developing a nuclear weapon. If you read the NIE, it's a lot more subtle than that, and it really doesn't explain why, if they've stopped their nuclear weapons program, they continue to enrich uranium and continue to build medium-range ballistic missiles.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are a lot of questions in this. I think anybody who wants to prevent an Iranian-Israeli nuclear exchange in the Middle East, which would result in the deaths of tens of millions of people, would be hoping that the CIA, for once, has gotten it right. But I'm not going to bet. I'm not going to bet anything.
Doesn't Iran continue to build medium-range missiles for the same reason that any country in the world with 75 million people, a big GDP, and a big army continues to have an army and continues to build missiles?
He's shaking his head no.
No, medium-range missiles are designed to carry special warheads, payloads. They are not a tactical weapon. They're a strategic weapon. If you don't have the warheads, there's no point in developing ballistic missiles. You develop short-range missiles, you develop artillery.
We've been talking a lot about other countries. We've been talking a lot about the past. Let's lean forward a little bit and talk about Israel in the next 10 to 20 years. What's plausible to be hoped for? What's desirable in the near term that can help set a different table from the one we've been trying to work with over the recent past?
Domestically or?
Domestically. Inside Israel, controlled by Israel, and understood by Israelis in a state where the governed have to have some sort of consent on what happens.
I suppose this is one of the reasons events like this attract such an audience, as that Israel is endlessly fascinating. It's such a dynamic society. Even if the problems with the Palestinians were to go away tomorrow, Israel would still face major domestic challenges. I think we all know what those challenges are. Relations with the Israeli Arab minority, prefer to call themselves now, to see themselves as an Israeli-Palestinian minority within Israel. Israel will definitely have to facilitate their integration into state institutions to benefit more from the growing prosperity of the state. Israel will have to address the increasing calls from the Arab sector for turning Israel from a Jewish state into a state of all its citizens. We will have to find some compromise with Arab desires for self-expression within an Israeli state. That is one issue, and I think it's a pressing issue. I think the second issue is, it's going to be a very controversial issue in Israel, productivizing the ultra-Orthodox sector, the growing ultra-Orthodox sector of Israeli society. If you realize that this year, 23% of the children that entered first grade did so through what they call the independent stream of education. That means the ultra-Orthodox. That means that approximately 29% of the Jewish population are outside of Israeli society in the future, outside of the challenge of army service, of full employment, of full engagement with the state. They see themselves as separate. This is a challenge to Israeli society that will have to be addressed. In 15 years from now, 50% of Israeli society will belong to sectors that see themselves consciously as non-Zionist. The Arab sector and the ultra-Orthodox sector of Israeli society. That's got to be a challenge to any society.
Well, that was really depressing. Before I give you a litany of woe, I mean, it's a sort of a Jewish habit to veer toward pessimism.
I'm not pessimistic.
No. Okay. That was his
I'll
positive.
explain why.
That was his positive.
Yeah, that was a rave.
Yeah, that was a rave review.
That was an opener.
Israel, the feel-good country of the Middle East. I mean, it's worth pausing and realizing how improbable the whole thing is at the age of 60. And that Israel, by most standards of measurement, is a startling success and has achieved in adversity what people can't even achieve when they are not fighting for their survival. It's all true, and the improbability gives me a kind of hope that improbably Israel will continue to flourish and survive into the future. Jewish history has to give you that hope ultimately. But I don't have to go over the points he made. The ultra-Orthodox challenge is a huge challenge. I think the settler challenge is a huge challenge. I think what we're living through, to go back to your very first question, one of the things that's interesting about the Israel story is there's a contradiction. One of the things that's so interesting about it is that nothing is new. We've all seen this before. We're in Hanukkah right now. What we're seeing on the West Bank is Hanukkah, 2,200 years later. You have the rough and ready hill Jews, heavily armed, intolerant of their Western or Greek-leaning lowland brothers, entering a period where they no longer respect the authority of the Jewish majority and and might someday come to actual blows with
and see themselves as the true heirs.
They're the Maccabees
of the
in their
state.
own. They're the Maccabees in their own understanding of the world.
Maybe they're stealing donkeys, but they think they're the real deal, and those other guys aren't.
Yes, but they're a fringe element, not the mass settler movement. But if you analyze the settler movement more carefully, and you subtract the people who live in the suburbs of Jerusalem, and you subtract the people who live in the major settlement concentrations, which are very near to the borders of Israel and can be dealt with in negotiations with the Palestinians, you are left with the people that the state has already defined as beyond the pale, on the other side of the wall.
And my fear is that it only took one Yigal Amir, one human manifestation of this problem, to change the course of history. And I worry that as things come to a head, that we will, God forbid, see another Yigal Amir who will do something equally heinous that will lead us down a very, very dark path. Sorry to be pessimistic about it, but I do see that as one of a set of problems.
Definitely.
I mean, the biggest problem, I think, is the open question to me about whether Arab Muslims can ever accept on an equal basis the existence of a Jewish state in what they see as Muslim land. This used to not be such an open question to me in the late 90s. I thought we were moving toward a orderly close to a 100-year war between Jew and Muslim, Arab and Israeli. It's now an open question, and I don't think that the rejectionist Hamas-Hezbollah strategy is not smart. I think it's smart. I don't think it's necessarily moral, but I think it's clever. If you make Israel's life, the life in Israel, untenable over generations, eventually the Israelis will say, all right, enough of this. We cannot live in this neighborhood anymore. In the meantime, you destroy generations and generations of Palestinians. But if you've made that calculation, that the long strategy, if you will, makes a certain amount of strategic sense.
Well,
And
let me stop you right there, because something apparently happened between the early 90s and now. When you talk privately to the Hanan Ashrawis of the world, when you talk privately to the Saeb Erekats of the world, they recognized that Israel was an established fact, that there would still be a place called Israel on the map decades hence, that one of the big pages of history was being turned now, and that Fatah was ready to scratch out those parts of its charter which were forever opposed to the existence of Israel. That was the spirit in the early 90s. But now you're talking about rejectionists, eliminationists, being ready to hang in for the long haul because they think, hey, we have a shot again. What happened?
Pathological rejection by an ascendant Islamist movement of Jewish civil equality, the idea of Jewish national equality, combined with a series of mistakes by the Israeli government, smaller tactical mistakes that led to the empowerment of Hamas. Everything is obviously done in the shadow of 9/11, and the more that Al-Qaeda can create the civilizational struggle that really didn't exist before 9/11, the better off the rejectionists are, obviously. I just think, what I'm saying is I think at a very basic level, one of the things the Palestinians haven't decided for themselves, among other things, how to govern themselves, but one of the things they haven't grappled with is the idea of truly accepting a Jewish national homeland in what they think is their land. And you know, if you look at the sources, if you talk to these guys, as I have, about what the Quran says, about what the Prophet Muhammad's relationship was with the Jews, you don't come out of these conversations very hopeful that you're going to have a solution anytime soon. Because I mean, the key moment for me was 2000 and late 2000. I was in Ramallah at a funeral, a Fatah funeral. It was with Marwan Barghouti, as a matter of fact, the now jailed leader of the uprising. It was a Fatah demonstration, 10,000 people on the way to the funeral, and they started chanting. There's this chant that I knew from Hamas, Khaybar Khaybar Ya Yahud, Jaish Muhammad Sa'uf Ya'ud, which means that, O Jews of Khaybar, the army of Muhammad is returning. This was a secular nationalist Fatah crowd. What that's referring to is the defeat by the Prophet Muhammad and his armies of the Jews of the oasis of Khaybar 1,400 years ago. And I thought to myself at that moment, wow, we're really not talking about the 67 borders. We're really talking about the whole idea. It was when in my mind we reverted back from an argument about 67 to an argument about 48.
A moment ago, you looked askance at me that I was being pessimistic. I would rather be in the situation we are now. If we held this discussion and this gloomy prognosis of the development attitudes of the Arab world, say 10 years after Israel was created, I would be worried. But we could have had this discussion for the last 60 years, and Israel has gone from strength to strength and continues to do so. There is still no Palestinian state, and the Arabs are still no closer to realizing their fundamentalist dreams. And for all of the domestic problems that I remind us of a moment ago, we must remember that Israel is an extremely dynamic society. It's constantly changing and does address issues. 20 years ago, we would have listed another 3 or 4 major domestic social issues that have since withered and gone away, have been resolved, challenges have been met. I'm confident that Israel has the ability to meet the challenges, the recent challenges, the current challenges that I mentioned. And I prefer to be on the side of the Israeli border as Tel Aviv flourishes and the economy grows and the Arab theologians rant.
You know, there's contradictions inside contradictions here. You have a state that's under pressure, that has these social problems. It also attracts right now more high-tech venture capital than any other country in the world, except for China. You have an economy that's growing like gangbusters. You have a vibrant place where Judaism is flourishing in a way that it's never flourished before. The Jewish people have never been in a better position. I can be pessimistic and optimistic in the same minute. Because of Israel, you have a situation where the Jews as a people worldwide are in better shape than they've been since the Roman destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago. You have half the Jews living in the actual promised land, basically half the Jewish world living in the promised land, the other half living in another promised land, this sui generis American experience, a diaspora country that actually likes and accepts Jews. There are no captive communities anymore of Jews in the world, precisely because Israel has been a physical refuge, and precisely because American Jews have exerted their political power to get them free. But you're left at the end of the day with what the thing that I always think about, the imperfection of both promised lands. Israel is a place that's safe for Judaism. It's a Jewish baby factory, and there's 1 million yeshivas, and there's 1 million courses of study, and it's a place that runs on the Jewish calendar. But it's not safe for Jews yet. America is safe for Jews, but it's not really safe for Judaism. And so you have two right now imperfect promised lands. But I mean, so overall, I'm not a pessimist about the future, and I hope the NIE was right, obviously.
A Jewish baby factory, well, Professor Zweig alluded to that a little earlier, but saw some of the seeds of continuing problems in that same demographic
we have to work.
truth.
We have to work to recruit the ultra-Orthodox to the culture of iPods and instant gratification.
That's right.
And, we'll work on that.
They have a dropout rate too. It's all right.
It's a hard life.
Yes.
That life.
Well, one difference, this last visit to Israel was the first in a long time, and one very palpable difference was the changing attitude toward the ultra-Orthodox, which was indulgent once upon a time and is now a little frosty. There was not the same willingness to sustain non-military service, for instance, because a lot of alternative service isn't asked in response. A lot of people I spoke to found the roots of that in the precarious coalition building of Knesset alliances and the way you end up taking portfolios and power, where a couple of influential and pivotal religious parties hold a disproportionate amount of say inside a parliament of a state where what used to be one of the most cherished experiences of a young man, or one of the most foundational experiences of a young man, that is army service, is just not part of the waking reality for a large number of men now in this country. Not a small, marginal number of men, but a large and visible number of men. When you've still got guys in their 30s and 40s heading out for the weekend or for 10-day hitches out by the borders and leaving their lives behind, and not always happily.
I mean, the tragedy is that this was a program that the draft exemption, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, was instituted by Ben-Gurion very early in the state.
Allow me to correct you.
Okay.
Allow me.
Okay.
Ben-Gurion agreed to a very small, limited number.
Like 500 or something.
1,000.
It was after the Holocaust, and there were no Jewish scholars left.
Exactly. And by the time the Labour Party lost power in Israel in 1977, there were 7,000 military service waivers a year. There are now 40,000. The person who revolutionized the relationship to the Orthodox and military service was Begin. Begin's second government, I'm sorry. And the people who negotiated on his behalf were Ezer Weizmann and Arik Sharon, the two generals in his army, because the army didn't want them as soldiers. They were expensive and unproductive. So the army gave up on them, laying the seeds for a huge social problem today. There are today 40,000 waivers.
Well, I'm sure in the past hour you've heard something provocative, tantalizing, something you need to hear more about, something you want to ask more about. There are microphones in the two side aisles, and please tell us who you are, and if you want to direct your question to either Jeffrey Goldberg or Professor Zweig, please do so. Yes, ma'am.
Is it working? Hello. Hi, I'm Leila Kawar. I'm a PhD student at NYU in the Law and Society program. And sitting and listening to this talk, it makes me think about my own country. In this country, we don't tell our history anymore without including the history of the peoples that we settled. And I was thinking of Chicanos in particular. Since the Civil Rights Movement, thankfully, the histories of those peoples are included. Those peoples are usually represented in retrospective discussions of American history. And I didn't really hear the perspectives, narratives, values of my relatives, Palestinian Israelis, included in this discussion. 20% of Israel's citizen population are non-Jews. Their histories include being under military rule until 1966, having their land taken from them, moderate leaders expelled, continuing racism, continuing very disproportionate public services given to those communities. And I think if one of them had been here, they might have been able to make the point that there was no Palestine to accept or reject anything in 1948. I don't think they would agree with your assessment that there was a rejection, because there was no Palestine. How could there be a rejection? So I have two suggestions. First would be, perhaps if you do this in the next 6 months, you could include some voices from your minority community. And the second suggestion is, if you choose not to do that, you could just use the adjective Jewish when you say, for example, we as Jewish Israelis have a dilemma. Thanks.
I agree with almost everything you say, and it is addressed. In the context of this afternoon, I'm not sure whether we would have had the sort of dialogue that we intended today. However, you are quite right. I did allude to the issue of relations to Israeli-Arab community, Israeli-Palestinians, as being one of the major issues. The need to open up Israeli society to address the question of a country for all its citizens. I did allude to that. In terms of representing the narrative, I can tell you that I searched far and wide to find a Palestinian lecturer to present the Palestinian narrative to a group of students that I'm responsible for here. And if you allowed us 6 months, in May, the coming year, the Association of Israel Studies is holding its annual conference at NYU. This is a free plug, but the title of the conference is 60 Years Later, Are the Narratives Converging? And we are bringing Palestinian historians to debate with Israeli historians about the events of 1948. There's much more openness than you might believe to allowing every narrative, because this is very much part of Israel's narrative too. You're quite right.